Today on Spotlight Now, we are talking about regenerative tourism. What does that really look like? How can we make sure that tourism is a two-way street where all parties benefit? Join us for that exciting conversation. We've got leaders from the visitor industry and some community members from Hana. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, thanks so much for joining us here on this Tuesday afternoon on Spotlight Now. Ryan Kalei-Suji is on assignment for us in New York. He's working on a very exciting show that we will be bringing to you in June. So I'm solo today, but we have a very exciting show. We are talking about regenerative tourism. Jay Talwar is here from the Hawaii Visitors and Convention Bureau. Thank you so much for being here, Jay.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting us.
So I want to start with some numbers, and we're going to get into some of the work you're doing with communities on the ground, making sure that, as we alluded to in the open there, that tourism is a two-way street where everyone is benefiting, both the visitors and, of course, the communities that host them. But before we get to that, let's talk about the numbers that you're seeing, because, of course, we're all interested in the data here. How are we doing when it comes to tourism?
Well, tourism's being challenged right now, with the strength of the U.S. dollar against foreign currencies, with people feeling more comfortable flying internationally. I just came back from New York. I was the only one on the plane with a mask. So people are exhibiting travel behavior that's different than it was 2 years ago, for sure. And they're going overseas, and that's a challenge for us. And then with the strength of the dollar, it's a bargain for them to go overseas. So, we're working as hard as we can. The Tourism Authority, Hawaii Tourism Authority, and their new leadership is working well with the legislature, which helps us and gets us funding for the long term. So we're looking at the numbers, and they're challenging.
Yeah.
Maui's numbers are down significantly through the end of this year. Statewide, we're at probably 2% to 7% down every month through the end of the year. So there's a challenge here for sure.
Now, do you attribute that to the factors that you're talking about, the strength of, the dollar versus the yen? Everybody I know is going to Japan, right?
It's true.
But do you attribute it to that, or is this impact from the wildfires themselves?
I think it's a combination, for sure. I think we saw softness coming just before the wildfires in Maui, so starting in June last year. And then, of course, the wildfires and the horrific impact they had on the people of Maui made the news across the country. And we were asking people to be mindful, to be respectful, and to wait for the right time to come back. And now we have to be out there with our messaging, ensuring that they hear it's time to come back. And so we're at that point right now.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. Mufi Hanneman has been on this program before talking about this sort of welcoming back messaging that they are starting to work on. We know that he is now going to be the head of the Hawaii Tourism Authority. So we're interested to know what does that message look like, and how do you make that so that the people who are on the ground in Maui, some folks who are still not housed, how we're sensitive to their needs while at the same time trying to make sure that the economy is shorn up so that they can have a job and that things can continue?
Sure, it's a challenge. Back in October last year, the Hawaii Tourism Authority provided us with $2.6 million in funds to help support the recovery of Maui, the economic recovery. And it was clear at that point we couldn't tell the story, we couldn't talk. So we worked with people on Maui, from Maui, and gave them a platform to raise their voices, to talk to people across the continent about what they were going through, and then that they were welcoming visitors back to allow them to continue to work, to earn a living, and to stay on Maui. And so that led right into what HTA Chair of the Board, Mufi Hanneman, is doing now, and has brought in from HLTA, the Makakau campaign, which really shows people on Maui, again, talking about how they're ready to host visitors. And so we're now transitioning our overall campaign, which still carries the value of Malama to take care of the place, but also with a little bit more welcoming to visitors.
And tell me a little bit about, this idea of sustainable tourism, regenerative tourism. Let's look at the numbers. In 2019, we had about 10 million visitors come to the state of Hawaii. which I think a lot of folks kind of bristle at. We felt like that might have been a little too much. And then we went through COVID, where we experienced what it was like to have nobody, which, from an economic standpoint was devastating. But for a lot of folks, it felt like we finally had a little breathing room.
Yeah, it was gorgeous that way.
It was, the beaches were ours once again. What do you think is the right balance? Is there a number that you think that we should strive for as a state that is appropriate so that we don't feel so sort of, put on?
Yeah, absolutely. And the number is tough, because if someone comes and stays 2 days versus staying 12 days, the absolute number of visitors probably isn't the right measure. So the average visitor count or visitor census is probably more accurate to look at. And the way we can manage that is really by looking at how many beds we have for visitors. And so the counties are now looking, with the governor's support, at home rentals and the role they can play for the visitors and for the residents, and getting that back in balance that works best for the residents. So that's important. Back before 2019, when we got to 10.4 million visitors, about 10 years before that, we were at 7.2. None of that growth came from additional hotel guests. It all came from home rentals, a lot of them that were not permitted to be home rentals. And that allowed visitors to go into neighborhoods to really affect the residents' quality of life. So I think with the counties coming together with the governor to manage that kind of loophole, we're now back to a bed count, I think, that allows us to have a visitor plant that we can manage, and then we can have better quality of life for residents.
I think you're really keying into something that when the governor comes on this program, he talks about a lot, and the mayor as well, just that this feeling of tourists being not in the tourism zones, and that the tourism districts are created for a reason. Not that we don't necessarily want to share the beauty of the entire state with people who come here, but that having what you didn't sign up for, a hotel, as your neighbor, doesn't really sit right. What do you think, if this enforcement is successful, what the state is talking about, what the counties are talking about, how do you think that will change the residents' experience of tourists in our community?
I think it'll be much more positive. You'll see visitors, hopefully, doing positive things in the community through their Malama actions, but you also won't see them having a party next door Wednesday night. And I think that's the real rub. The absolute number, of course, is a factor as well. So we need to look at kind of zoning, permitting. It's an issue that goes to the Hawaii Tourism Authority and beyond, because there's a whole infrastructure need, a whole vision, a whole zoning and planning process that can manage tourism, but also do it in a way that first and foremost benefits residents.
When we have these conversations about tourism and about marketing Hawaii specifically, a lot of folks say we don't need to advertise Hawaii. Hawaii sort of sells itself. What do you think is the argument for messaging and for attracting a specific type of visitor? Why is that tax dollars well spent?
Sure. There was just a study done on the return that was covered in the paper, so I won't go into those details, but it's extremely positive return just economically. I think also if you look at other large brands, Coca-Cola, they've got a great share, but they continue to advertise because they know they've got competition. We've got incredible competition, so we know we need to be top of mind. But more so, I think we need to invite visitors that we're going to be happy hosting. And so if we can target in and focus on those who exhibit mindful behavior in their daily lives, who care about the environment, who care about the culture of the places they visit and want to help perpetuate them, if we can get a higher and higher share of those as guests in our homes, then I think we've got to win. And so the marketing dollars aren't to invite anyone and everyone, but to invite the mindful traveler.
And how do we key in on that mindful traveler? Where are they? How do we find them?
There's a lot of data out there, and our agencies are very smart, and so we're able to look at the data, and we've identified people who exhibit those behaviors in their daily lives and when they travel. And now we're able to look at 26 million people around the continent and target in on them and develop messaging that catches their attention and positions Hawaii in a way that makes it attractive to them. I think the people who say everyone knows Hawaii are correct. As soon as you say Hawaii to someone, they have an image that comes to mind. But is it the image we want to perpetuate? And so that's what we're trying to do with this audience.
One thing that you mentioned was the Malama Hawaii campaign. And one thing I had been reading about was this Malama dashboard that you had stood up to try to get visitors to actually spend some of their time here giving back to the state. Tell us how that's going. What kind of projects are they involved? Are people actually signing up to do volunteer work on their vacation?
Yeah, absolutely. It started in right after COVID, travel restrictions were lifted, and we saw that in 2019, a lot of visitors, maybe on the road to Hana or elsewhere, were parking on people's yards, jumping over fences, going to a trailhead illegally, and that's how residents were experiencing visitors. And so the thought was, what if residents saw visitors shoulder to shoulder helping take care of the trailhead, taking care of the lo'i, taking care of the fish pond, and doing positive actions in the community. And we did research on that, and it blew our mind. Visitors want to do that. The visitors that we get now were part of over-tourism, and they don't want to be the ugly traveler. They want to be a traveler who's respectful of the places they go, the people they visit, and the cultures and the environment. So right now, we're working with Kanu Hawaii, and they've taken over the dashboard from us because that's what they do is volunteer projects, and it's amazing. I was looking at it this morning, and there's so many different, there's probably a dozen activities for today. And so it's for residents and visitors. We want to make sure we're inclusive that way because, again, to have people interacting and bumping shoulders with each other, people who share common values, it just becomes a better experience for both the resident and the visitor.
And what kind of things can they do?
It's as simple as there's one for egg washing. So amazing things that need to happen in the community. Others have to do with cleaning up beaches, school grounds, trailhead maintenance. There's so many. You've got to go to Kanu Hawaii.
Yeah, I think so. And tell me a little bit about what you hope the visitors actually take away from that. I think, the adage being it's better to give than to receive. When they invest their time in Hawaii, what do you think that does for them?
We were challenged when we started the program because people were telling us, they've been through COVID. They just want to come to the beach. Just show the beach. And we said, no, we're trying to attract a visitor that our residents are going to be happy hosting. And so first we brought in people who we knew through the industry. So they were travel agents and editorial content developers, whether they're writers, editors, publishers. And they'd all been to Hawaii a bunch of times. And to a person, they all said, this was the best experience I've ever had. Because they were in the community, they were helping people, they were with like-minded people, and they're doing it for half a day to a full day at most. And they said it was the most enriching experience they've ever had traveling to Hawaii.
What, in your mind, what is the ideal visitor? What is a regenerative tourist? What is sustainable? When we talk about these sort of buzzwords that we hear a lot and that are things that I think can be interpreted in different ways, what does that ideal sort of model citizen tourist look like to you?
Right. I think it's someone who comes, again, with an open mind and an open heart and willing to learn. There's a lot of indigenous knowledge in Hawaii. People lived here, almost 1 million people, before contact, without a ship bringing goods and services in. So there's a system here based on knowledge that allowed people to live in harmony with nature. And we're there again. And parts of the world aren't there yet. So they're going to get there. We have more and more people every year. And so it's going to be an issue for other people. So if people can come and learn from us in that way, that's positive. So if we can attract people who care about cultures, environments, and learning from indigenous cultures, that's ideal. People who can afford a vacation in Hawaii is part of that, of course. And then those who are really looking to enrich themselves by learning. So I think that's the key.
Yeah, we want those folks.
Yeah.
Those sound like good folks. One of the reasons that we invited you here today is to talk a little bit about Rediscovering Hawaii's Soul, which is a project that you are involved in through the Hawaii Executive Collaborative. Our longtime viewers will know that this is something that we talk about on a semi-regular basis. Full disclosure, HEC is one of the sponsors of this program. And one thing that they've been doing are these Rediscovering Hawaii's Soul workshops, bringing thought leaders together on a variety of very important issues. We've talked about ceded lands on this program before, and you are part of the tourism hui. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with Rediscovering Hawaii's Soul and what your experience has been like.
Sure. I wasn't sure what it was when I started, but I knew the people, or some of the people there, and really respected them. So again, came with an open mind, sat down and met. And we had a larger group at first, and then we broke up into different industry huis or subject matter huis. Not surprisingly, I was selected to go to the tourism hui. And the nice thing is it's a diverse group of people coming from different places, different perspectives. And rather than focusing on what makes us different, this hui allows us to work together in a way to find out what we have in common first. So it's really about the relationship to start with. How are we developing better relationships, more relationships with people across the community, across the islands, in a way that's positive? And once we sit down together, we see we want the same thing. You know, we come from different places, but we want the same thing.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that aspect, because I would think that traditionally some of the folks that you're meeting with, and we're going to be speaking to someone after the break about that, that they could be folks that you generally tend to be more, I wouldn't say in conflict, but not necessarily, you know, maybe submitting opposing testimony at the legislature, let's say.
Sure.
So, you know, where we have, you know, thought leaders in tourism, business leaders from Bishop Street, we have Native Hawaiian activists, and they're all coming together, not necessarily always to agree, but just to share ideas. So what is that process like?
It's slow, and you know, as a business person, you want everything to be solved yesterday. But it's a great exercise because it slows you down. We go for walks with each other and just talk story, and we find out with someone who would typically be cast as that person you described going to the legislature saying no more tourism, period. But we got to a common understanding, you know, kind of where we come from, what we want to perpetuate, what we want our children, their children, and their children to experience. How do we enrich their lives? How do we look a little longer term and more kind of values based, and find commonalities there? And then all of a sudden you realize we're kind of looking at the same pathway, just from a different perspective, but the end point is the same.
Yeah, I love that. We're going to be talking much more about those conversations, how they're happening on the other side of this break. Spotlight Now continues right after this. Stay with us.
What is Hawaii's soul?
It's the way we exist with all living things. The aina, the ocean, the sky, the kanaka, who originated from the islands.
And everyone who calls Hawaii home.
It's all of us living with island consciousness.
It's understanding that the past is in front of us so that everyone can follow the kupuna
that came before us.
It's our shared kuleana to take care of these islands.
And each other, because we belong to Hawaii.
We are Ko Hawaii.
And we are continuing our conversation about regenerative tourism. I think I finally got my mouth around that. With Sunny Makua, who is a community member from Hana. Thank you so much for making the trip for us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Mahalo.
We know that you have been involved with the Rediscovering Hawaii's Soul movement, and we want to talk to you about that and the interactions that you've been having with Jay and others in that in those workshops. But first, for some background just about you, tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in Hana and for Maui, especially when it comes to tourism.
So, veli na mai me ke aloha, mai ka aina lani ha'aha o Hana. So my warmest welcome to you from Hana Maui, the low-lying clouds, the low-lying heavens of Hana. It's where I find peace. That's my homeland. It's where my ancestors have been for a long time. And we are finally, we're in this point that we are part of this conversation. I never thought I'd be here, to tell you the honest truth. And I represent, first of all, my family, the Kau'i Makaole family from Maka'alai, and a group of Native Hawaiian Aina-based organizations across East Maui who really are putting Aina at the center of all of our work and all of our conversations. So when we were invited into this space to have this conversation with the Maui Visitors Bureau, talking about over-tourism along our thoroughfare of Hana Highway, it was a process, you know? It was a process coming into it as a community to think about, Hana Highway stems from, you know, Ko'olau, which is before Ke'anai, Kailua, all the way to Kahikinui, and lots of different communities along the way. And so as we started to surface the real issues around what is it that we want to be able to share?
with our visitors. We've really not been in this conversation. That's what we realized. We really haven't been maybe invited or even wanting to be a part of this conversation, perhaps. But we are, because visitors are coming.
And we know visitors are coming.
Yeah.
We've seen the videos of just how backed up the road gets. We know the dangers that that poses to the community when it comes to emergency services, and just the hassle of having these roads clogged up and this long commute, making a very difficult situation there. Tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing when it comes to Malama Maui Hikina. That officially launched earlier this year. How is that going? And for viewers who are not familiar with that work, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so again, through those multiple conversations that we've had with Maui Visitors Bureau that's funded by HTA, we, as an organization, or as the organizations that came together, thought we needed to really look at what it is that we want to do and partner with HTA and Maui Visitors Bureau. So it took about a year, it feels like, in conversation to come to that center where we are okay with moving forward. I'm part of one organization. There's 3 organizations that got the contract, and we have 2 sites that we manage. And we started off in October, but officially launched in January. Kaihalulu is one area, and Waiawaka, or commonly known as Waioka, is the other area. The first thing we did as a community was really come together and understand these places. So really start to dive deeper into like place names and the rivers that feed these areas, the winds that come into these areas, and really walk the land and really understand, why did our kupuna name these areas this place, these names? And in those names, we really understand now why they actually have meaning and warnings. Waiawaka is the raging waters that rise suddenly. And that is true. We know that in that area, when you start to see the water come down, when you see the clouds up high in Waihonu or Waihoi Valley and they're coming down, we know not to go into the river. I mean, that's common knowledge for our families, and it's not common knowledge for our visitors. And so when they were crossing over and going into private lands and finding themselves in trouble, our community members were out there helping them, risking their own lives. And this happens all the time throughout the coast, in various different spots. So we felt, as Keauhali'i, felt, and that's the landowners there, felt that we wanted to be a part of that conversation to help manage our own property and see where we invite people into and where we don't. Where do we guide them to?
I think that's a tremendous responsibility to essentially become, a gatekeeper, if you will, to meet the person, to meet the visitor, to explain everything to them. How are those interactions? How are those warnings received?
So I can say that, from the residents' perspective, it was quite new for them, because the prior years it was, they found themselves having to shift in how they greet people. And if we are going to be hosts of an area that we are responsible for, people coming in, then how do we do that? So we created education boards that talk about the names, talk about safety. We have codes of conduct, which we go over with the visitors as they coming up. We're stationed at the heads of the trails for the 2 sites that we manage, and each site is different. We have to really treat it for what it is, and do we really want people in these areas, or do we invite them to go into other spaces that have parking, that have restrooms, that are safe to be at?
Well, I'm curious because I think that, social media has changed so much of how people experience their vacation, right? They want that, whatever experience they saw by an influencer on Instagram, they want to jump in that same waterfall and have that same video. So how do you, have that conversation? Hey, maybe this isn't the best day to go into this river. There's a beach just up the road that you can see. I would imagine that some people are disappointed. Some people don't want to have that experience. On the other hand, there also could be what Jay was talking about, visitors who are receptive to knowledge, perhaps, and visitors who want to respect the place and the people that they're being hosted by. So how do you sort of thread that needle?
Yeah, so we've seen the gamut.
I can imagine, yes.
But I can say in the short time, in the last 4 months, say that we've been in this project, visitors are grateful for the information. 97% on the visitors, those that have done our surveys, say that they are grateful for the information, for the safety precautions. Some even have graciously turned away and moved on to the other sites. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has, but I can say that it's a very small amount of people.
And overall, how do you think this has changed the experience for the community? Is there less traffic? Are less folks parking illegally on the side of the road? Or is there less trespassing? Are you able to actually see an impact from these 5 sites?
So from the 2 sites that I've been managing, I can say that residents are happy that we're there. There hasn't been a time in my history that I've known that we've really actively managed these sites or really been able to engage with people that are coming on to the property. They were just open, and then we'd have to find out later if somebody got hurt or not, Or, many of our families just don't go there anymore. Actually, that's really a true, that is very true for these areas. So what we want to do is find that middle ground, or find, where do we want people to be, visitors to be going to, and if families, want to go back there for pleasure or for subsistence lifestyles, like that's what's happening out there, right? That's what the way of life out there. And so we're still figuring that out.
Do you think that, when we asked Jay about what does a sustainable tourist look like, what is that in your mind? What is that ideal visitor? I think there are some folks who perceive some community activists as just saying no visitors at all, forget them, we don't want any of them. That seems to strike me as somewhat unfair. What is the balance there?
Yeah, I think really being able to share aloha aina. Aloha aina and aina aloha, the symbiotic relationship. People want, I think humanity wants this connection. Hawaii has this beat, this pana, that's why these places call to them. And I understand that. And when we talk about that, that's what our people were called to as well. And so, and there's certain places that are just sacred that we don't want people to go to. And so we will drive them or guide them into other places. And then there's certain places that we want to be able to share with them. But we want to be able to make that choice. We want to be able to have the narrative and have the landscape that we invite them into. And I think they will have I can tell you it's not there right now, but I do hope that we can build that conversation toward that.
Yeah. Do you think that, do you see tourists or visitors as an important part of Hawaii? Do you think that, we're so reliant, and we've experienced that time and again, that we're so reliant on tourism. We see that now even with the Maui wildfires and just having those tourists drop off and the economic impact that has. What do you think the place is for tourism in our community?
Yeah, for rural communities, it looks different. And oftentimes, like in Hana, they pass through. So where is the economic, where are they contributing? And I feel as a community member, we ought to look at this. And we ought to really see where do we want them to contribute, and what is that solution if we want that to happen. I feel that we have the opportunity now that we're in conversation, and we're part of these conversations that's lifting up, to be able to guide that. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that the state has been talking about is this sort of destination management. We see Hanauma Bay, we see Diamond Head, we see Haleakala, these sort of reservation systems. You know, those are appropriate for certain places, but we can't have a kiosk at every hike, right? So how do we figure that out?
Right. And there's certain places that have that now. Right now, Waianapanapa has that reservation, and that has shifted how community enters into those spaces. And so it's a good way for us to understand what that looks like and how we might manage it if we were to do it ourselves, perhaps. Or, Haleakala is one, Oheo, which is part of Haleakala National Park, is one area that they enter into as well. There's certain wayside stops along the way that I feel are very appropriate. But one of the things that I don't really know the answer to is when we talk about the mindful tourist, right? A mindful visitor, and the number of people, like we've been put out as like the road to Hana is a thing to do, but not everybody really enjoys it. You know what I mean? I mean, we see people getting sick on the road. They get lost, so we really want to bring, and our roads can't handle it. Our roads are falling apart, you know what I mean? And we have to drive that. I mean, it's unsafe. It's unsafe for our families. My granddaughter goes on the bus from Ke'anai to Hana every day, and she's 8 years old. You know, she did it from when she was kindergarten, and those buses are big, and they do that all the way to Kipahulu. So we want to make sure that we're safe. You know, we are safe, and that those that are coming on the road want to be there. Yeah. And the numbers, even though they're higher, they're not always better.
I understand what you mean. Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about Rediscovering Hawaii's Soul and your experience taking part. We know that you're on the same tourism hui as Jay. Tell us about, not a lot of people know, we're sort of starting this conversation statewide. Honolulu Magazine devoted their whole January issue to this movement. It is starting to become part of the conversation, but what did you know of it before you went in, and what was your experience like in that first workshop?
Yeah, so I joined in June last year, and I was invited by a friend, Kau'i Kanako Ole, who, there was the people that were there. I was like, okay, this could be a thing that I might be interested in, but I wasn't sure what it was about. And when I went, I realized there's people across the table that normally wouldn't be in the same room with one another, So it was a group of, I think, 5 of us from the community, that were, we had the lo'i farmer, we had the grassroots people coming into this space at the Hawaii Convention Center and having dialogue with, like, Governor John Waihe'e, and leaders of, those that are on Bishop Street, as well as leaders in the school, university systems, and being able to listen. I think for me, what I learned was really deepen my listening skills and really understand what perspective they're coming from, because I have a fixed way of thinking sometimes, like, okay, this is what I believe in, this is what I stand for. And if we want to solve big problems, we need to listen to each other better.
Yeah, Jay, when we asked him, he said the process was enlightening, but also kind of slow, right? But the process is sort of the point. I've had the ability to attend some of these workshops myself, and I'm very much a results-oriented kind of person. My job is to work on deadlines, so I want to know what's happening now. And I had at one point Kamana Opono Crab say to me, just relax. The process is the point. So how have you experienced that?
Yeah, so, the design thinking process is what I see, what I saw was going on. And when I was a part of other projects like that, I realized that when we design for the most vulnerable, that we really dig deep. Because sometimes the business person might need this to be happening. And the most vulnerable doesn't have a voice, usually, right? The marginalized. So those that are, we're starting to like listen to each other, or I felt like that's where the work is really starting to see where that middle ground is, that we can actually hear each other. And it starts with this. I mean, when they talk about rediscovering Hawaii's soul, I was like, what does that mean, really? And what I realized is that we're starting to see how we each have that connection to Hawaii as our home. And that every story is different, but the stories are meaningful and important just the same. And when we love something so much that we will do anything to make sure it stays the way that, in its beautiful way, that Hawaii, I mean, in many ways we're struggling, our environment, our economy, there's things that we're struggling at. But what can we do in this generation to ensure that we still have that essence, that Hawaii soul, that our children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren will have. And it's embedded in our aina. That's the key. And that's why aloha aina is so important. And aina aloha is that the land that loves us, that land, that aloha, that beat that comes from deep within the land that we are resonant to. And everybody feels it in some way or form, or has a story about it. When you're out in nature, when you watch a beautiful sunset, signs that we see that let us know that we're home.
There's a beautiful story that you shared that I was hoping that you could share with our viewers about a coconut tree without fruit in Waikiki. And I was we're going to invite Jay to join us back here in just a minute. But before we do invite him back, I wonder if you would share with us that story and sort of elucidate what that meant to you, seeing that tree.
Yeah, I guess it was a couple months ago in February when I came for one of the workshops. I looked outside of my window in Waikiki and I saw the trees lining the Kuhio Avenue. And they were, swaying in the wind. And I just had this profound understanding that they don't live their life for the purpose and function of what they're meant to do. Because the liability of having to cut the coconuts off, they can't live a full life. And, I'm not a coconut expert, but I do know enough about the coconut in the practices that my husband and I do, that's so important. It's so every fiber, every piece of that la'au, that kumula'au, is utilized, not only in Hawaii, but throughout the Pacific. And it's so important to us. And in our traditions, we know about sacred new groves. And so the stories of these, how our ancestors treated this plant, is so different than the way that it is treated today. And it's for maybe a picturesque view. And it's looked upon, and this is what surfaced in our in one of our discussions in that meeting, in fact, the difference between value and valuation. Value of what this niu and this kumula'au is to us as people, island people, and how it feeds us in so many different ways, and the valuation of what Waikiki has put it up for the view, maybe, and then also looking at it as a liability as opposed to an asset, which is what it is for us.
Right. So how do we achieve more harmony between those two objectives? Right?
That's the work. That is where the work is in rediscovering Hawaii's soul. That is the core of the work, I feel, is finding that space in between that we can, and when we talk about soul, that's where we connect. That's where everybody has that and connects to it in different ways. Yeah.
Our conversation is continuing just after this. Jay is going to join us back here. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now. Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation with Sunny Makua and Jay Talwar, and we are talking about rediscovering Hawaii's soul. We just heard Sunny share that beautiful story about the coconut tree in Waikiki and the sort of tension there between value and valuation. Tell us a little bit about your interpretation of that story and what you make of it.
Yeah, and I think more than my interpretation, it was kind of my participation in the storytelling and the discovery of the issue of values versus, or values and valuation being two separate things. So as we talked about the coconut tree, we said, well, what if you looked out the window and you saw a coconut tree there, a small grove, and then the ownership would see that as a liability because of the coconuts fall, and then what falls down would be viewed as trash, and how do you got to pay someone to sweep that away. But if you had a cultural advisor on board and they saw that coconut grove, and then they took visitors there and talked story with them and talked about the canoe plants and all the things the coconut tree can do for you, all of a sudden the visitor has a better experience. And when they have a better experience, the owner can charge a little bit more for the rate, and so the valuation goes up based on the sharing of values. And so we're looking for issues like that where we can work together, where we can support the values and also support the economic growth.
You know, and what's so interesting about the way that you kind of shift that narrative is that we tend to see the two sides that you are representing today, and not necessarily you as individuals, but just, you know, the visitor industry and community often in conflict, right? But what you're saying is that this can actually enhance everyone's experience. You know, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I see that there's, you know, a little window of hope in that one example, and looking at where can we find these pockets that we can come together. And I think, you know, whether it be something like that and really being able to, you know, put it on in a way that feels authentic and right for us as Kanaka, and sharing those authentic stories around it. And, you know, we may not go through a whole ceremony about it, but we can share the meaning of it. And I think that's what people are looking for today.
Right, that we want to be heard and understood.
Yeah.
I'm interested, what have you personally each experienced, and we'll start with you, Jay, through this work? What has it been like for you to be in these workshops and to be doing the follow-up work? Because we know that is a time commitment,
Sure.
and you're putting yourself out there also.
Right, right. I think as Sunny said, it's the draw of the people there, you know, so it's about the relationships that you develop with the people. And these are people you wouldn't often be in the same building with, let alone the same room. So getting together and understanding a broader perspective on what we're doing and understanding what we're doing long term, I think gets us on a similar path. And so for me, that's been kind of the reason to keep the work going, is there's joy and hope in that.
Yeah. What kind of
I love
shifts have
that.
you felt in yourself in doing this work?
Yeah, joy and hope. You know, that's what I'm leaving with, because I'm starting to look at their work, at the work of HTA. You know, there's a long history of HTA, and as a community member and somebody who never worked in the tourism industry and really committed not to, for various reasons, the way I was brought up with my family, and knowing, you know, things happen within our community, but beginning to understand that I want to know why. I want to so I started to look at that dashboard, and I started to look at shifts, because the old story no longer exists. And that was one thing that when I first met you, I was like, oh, so you're, you know, sharing about Hawaii, and like what you said earlier, it's like, do people need to know more about us? Everybody knows about us, but there's shifts that are occurring, you know, with COVID happening, with that tipping point that I learned that, and I didn't know that, but I felt it. I really felt it in the community, right? And so I'm opening up to understanding, how can I be a part of the solution?
Yeah, and for folks who aren't familiar, Rio's Partners is the folks that HEC has engaged through Rediscovering Hawaii's Soul to lead these workshops. They've done all work around the world, in South Africa, you know, healing after, you know, racial healing after apartheid. They've done work in Central and South America through, you know, a lot of community conflict there. when you describe to people what these workshops are actually like, because it's hard to kind of put into words, Sunny, when you go to a Rediscovering Hawaii Soul workshop, when you meet with someone like Jay, and when you do these Tourism Hawaii conversations, what's the work? What are you actually doing?
You're listening deeply, and you're bringing your best self forward. There's a lot of exhaustion at the end. I noticed, like, I'm tired. I'm spent after 3 days of working, because you're pushing yourself to these areas that you normally wouldn't, to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, like within my own self, to have these difficult conversations and dialogues that you need, and they push us to go deeper and deeper. And that's where the solutions start to surface. Not to say that that's the answer, but there's some kind of breakthrough that happens in these conversations. To create more space for that to happen.
Yeah, Jay, it sounds like a lot of vulnerability from the participants.
Yeah, you have to be open, and it is exhausting. But I think it's also done in a way that allows you to park your emotion for a moment and work with your intelligence and your heart still. But somehow the process allows you to have deep discussions, even from completely different points. I mean, we can have a discussion about something that's we're at complete odds about, but we're having a discussion and we're understanding each other, and we'll take that back, and maybe that's why we're exhausted.
And how have you taken this back and integrated it into the folks that you represent that cannot go to these workshops and may not have the time, because you're coming with yourself and your organization and your community, both of you. So how have you integrated what you're learning? Because we know the process is the point.
Sure.
How have you integrated that? Since there is no real, to me it feels like there's no real end, right? We're not working toward a summit here. We're kind of all traversing the mountain together.
Right. And trying to come together. And I think, for me, it's showed up in the work already. So in our messaging across the continent to visitors, we're talking about regenerative tourism issues. We're talking about how do we have the benefit of tourism reach a broader part of our community. And generally, it's by uplifting the voice of those people, because they're amazing people all around our community who haven't had their voice heard and have so much to share. So much knowledge, some amazing, innovation that happens on top of cultural knowledge, which expresses itself as fashion design, as different arts and crafts, as cuisine. So there's so much that we're learning about that's taking what we're learning in these sessions and already showing it in our work.
Sunny, how about you? How have you seen this sort of ripple out into the work that you do?
Yeah. Being bold and just stepping forward and taking on this contract was a big step for us as a community, and really wanting to work and grapple through those difficulties, through the contracts where we didn't agree. We had to drop the sales, and it took us a few months to get through that. But working with MVCB and then all the way up to HTA to be able to come to that common understanding of where we, with our intellectual property and our rights, to say this is where the line is, and they agreed to it. And that was a big breakthrough for us. So we, giving it our earnest effort to do what is pono by the aina and understand what is our message. Because we're able to now say, we want to be able to share that narrative, and we have to come up with that. And that's a challenge.
That's a big responsibility, too. And what's interesting, sort of coming back to where our conversation started, that you said with creating these stewards on these 5 sites, that, you felt like you were finally being asked to be included in the conversation. And that sounds like that's also what's happening with these Rediscovering Hawaii Soul workshops. What does it feel like to be asked to join and to have that seat at the table?
Yeah, it's humbling, because we walk kind of lightly into that area where we're not sure what our role maybe is and how do we show up. But at the end of the day, we realize, when we do those walks, You know, I was walking with the CEO of First Hawaiian Bank, you know, and we're people. We're human beings, you know what I mean? Wanting the best for our health and well-being of our home. Yeah. And when we come together on that, you know, on that high level, we figure out our place in it. Yeah.
And I think for folks who have not had the pleasure of doing this, these walks are so interesting.
Yeah.
So just for reference for our viewers who haven't participated, you go on a paired walk with someone that you might not know, and it feels kind of random, but at the end you're like, oh, I actually really needed to talk to that person.
Right.
Jay, tell us your experience in the walk.
Yeah, it was meaningful. It was someone I would never walk and talk with otherwise. So a lady who represents part of Maui, part of Molokai, and just started off with very pointed discussion, kind of checking me out, trying to understand who I am, where I come from. And after several laps walking around and talking, we came to an understanding of what we want long-term vision-wise for our communities. And they were aligned, and that conversation would never happen otherwise. Yeah, so it was also, again, one of those moments for more hope.
Where do you think this goes from here? What are your hopes for the RHS work and what we've talked about today?
Yeah, I think it needs to continue, and I wasn't sure of that 6 months ago, because, again, you know, I wanted to get on deadline and accomplish something. But I think what I'm seeing is a broader group of people getting together, having these conversations, having these walks, having these talks, and understanding kind of what the end goal is, and that we're all aligned with that. And as long as we keep that vision clear and understand it's okay if we come from different perspectives, if we walk a winding path or a straight path, it doesn't matter as long as we're all focused on the same end goal.
Yeah, and Tony, same question for you. Where do you see this going? What is your hope for this movement and this work?
Yeah. Well, I see that, like Jay, that last one, I was like, it was like clear as mud for me until we settled at the very last day. But also what we are doing is coming across disciplines. I mean, those cross sectors that they put us together in different circles that we start to begin to understand food sovereignty and ceded land issues, you know, and education, how everything is intertwined, that it touches each other, and we need to understand these things for the betterment of our Hawaii, our Hawaii. Yeah. And I hope it does go forward. I do see it going forward.
If you want to learn more about this, you can check out Honolulu Magazine. Their whole January issue was devoted specifically to this, so go to their website. You can also go to rediscoveringHawaiiSoul.org. Sunny and Jay, thank you so much for being our guest and for sharing today. We learned so much through the process. We love these conversations. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank
Mahalo.
you so much.
And we'll be right back after this.
With Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji, connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands, going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Such an interesting conversation. We thank you for being a part of it today. It was so interesting to hear these sort of two sides of the same coin, talking about regenerative tourism and also the Rediscovering Hawaii Soul movement. We want you to learn more about that. Make sure to check out rediscoveringHawaiiSoul.org. You can learn about the work that's being done and perhaps find out how you can participate in one of these workshops, because the work is so meaningful. Next week, Ryan will be back again. He is on assignment in New York working on a very important and exciting topic. We've got political analyst Colin Moore joining us, along with two folks from the Honolulu Salary Commission. We know that this has been a controversial issue of, this group is responsible for raising the pay of Honolulu City Council members along with others. There was a lot of backlash to that movement. So why did that happen to the scale that it did? And what's next for this commission as they try to evaluate the pay for different sectors of our city? So please join us for that. And of course, Colin Moore, a fantastic political analyst. He's going to help us break down what happened in the legislative session this term, what got done, what didn't, and what it means for our state. So join us next week right here on Spotlight Now. We leave you with a beautiful shot of sunny Honolulu, clear skies, looking just gorgeous out there. We'll see you again right back here next week. Until then, aloha.